should watch this at night. Hey curious cats, my name is Sahara. Welcome to that true crime channel. Let's get into it. For tonight's case, we're not actually going anywhere. We'll be in an aircraft, so I'll put a plane in the title instead of the usual flag, because we're going to be talking about flight 9525, the tragedy that happened on March 25th of 2015. That was 5 years ago, and it was the flight that was going from Barcelona, Spain to Düsseldorf, Germany. So this aircraft is an Airbus A320. The pilot's name is Patrick Sundenheimer. He's 34 years old. He has 10 years of experience and over 6,000 hours of flying. The co-pilot or first officer is Andres Lubitz. He's 27 years old and he has about 900 flying hours. On that day, they had a perfect weather, perfect conditions. Everything was pretty normal, pretty standard. And in case you're wondering why aircraft have two pilots or three if it's long-haul flights, it really is mostly because of safety. So in case anything happens to one of the pilots, someone can take over. And it also helps keeping errors to a minimum. The co-pilot will help the pilot with every checks they have to make, and they can also provide a second opinion in case of an emergency, for example. This flight had 144 passengers and 6 crew members, so 4 in the cabin and 2 in the flight deck. Departure was at 10:01 in the morning and arrival was scheduled at 11:39. Usually an aircraft reaches cruising altitude at around 38,000 feet. That can change depending on the aircraft and its weight and the weather conditions, but on average it's usually 38,000 feet. That can change depending on the aircraft, its weight, the weather conditions, but it usually is about 38,000 feet. So check out this diagram of the stages of a flight. So you have takeoff and climb, which we can consider as one stage, which we will call takeoff. Then you have on course or cruising, and then you have the approach and landing that we can consider also as one stage that we can call landing. It usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes for the aircraft to reach cruising altitude, and it takes about pretty much the same time for the approach and the landing. So that means that the cruise, especially on a short haul flight, the cruise can be pretty short. It doesn't give a lot of time for crew members to have their meals, have their breaks. Sometimes you don't even have time to get a break. And in this short amount of time during the cruising, you have to do service, you have to eat your meal if you want to have your meal. If it's, the right time of day for you to have your meal, you can also have your bathroom breaks and everything. And it can be a very short amount of time. In this flight, let's round it down to 130 minutes. That means you have to take away 20 minutes for takeoff, take away 20 minutes for landing, and that leaves about 40 minutes to do everything else. And you have to know that during takeoff and landing, which are what we call the critical stages of a flight, you have to be alert, you have to be doing whatever you have to be doing as a cabin crew member or as a flight crew member. You have to be alert, you have to be, focused on your task. You can't do anything else, and it is absolutely not the right time to be eating or to be taking a bathroom break. So if a crew member needs to use the bathroom, they will most likely do that either in between flights, when you're disembarking and embarking new passengers, or during the cruise. On the Airbus 320, you usually have 3 bathrooms, one that is at the front of the aircraft, it's right behind the flight deck door, and you have 2 at the back. And you should know that in this particular plane, the bathroom at the front was not working for some reason. So during the cruise, the captain needed to take a bathroom break, and because of this front bathroom not working, he had to walk all the way back to the other bathrooms that were working. They were at the far end of the aircraft. And obviously when he left the flight deck, he had to close the flight deck door. You can't just leave it open. So he goes to the bathroom, and when he comes out, he notices that something's happening. He notices that the plane is like changing its course. It's descending. It's slightly, but as a passenger, you don't notice it because to you it doesn't mean anything, because it was at the time it was so slight that you didn't really notice any difference. But the captain knows that this should not be happening. And what happened was the first officer had changed the altitude on the commands of the aircraft to 100 feet. So from 38,000 feet, he changed it to 100 feet. On top of that, he also increased the speed of the aircraft, so it's going a bit faster now. At that time, the aircraft is flying over France, and the closest ATC air traffic control is in Marseille. They notice something's wrong. They notice that the plane is descending when it really shouldn't be. So they try to call the plane, they try to call the flight deck. Whenever a plane is descending or approaching for landing, because that's the only reason you would descend, you have to be cleared by air traffic control. And because that tower was the closest, that's why they made the call. They're not getting any answers from the flight deck, so they keep calling and they're asking, do you read me? Do you read me? And they don't hear any response. And because of that, they also ask nearby aircrafts, other aircrafts, to also try and reach that flight deck and ask them if everything's okay. At that point, again, the first officer increases the speed of the aircraft. At that point, the captain was rushing back to the front of the aircraft and he tried to get back inside the flight deck. Now, before I give you any more information about the timeline, I should explain to you how a flight deck door works. And technically, I'm not revealing any corporate secrets. This is information that you can find online, so I think it's safe for me to say. As you can see in this picture, in the flight deck, you have a toggle that controls the door. During the flight, this toggle will be set on norm, which means normal access. You can never open the flight deck door from the outside. You can just push it. First of all, you don't even have a handle. So say, for example, the captain wants his meal or his coffee. He will call you on the intercom and he'll be like, hey, Sahara, be dear and bring me my meal. So you prepare the meal for the flight crew or the coffee or whatever it is that they want. And what you do is you never knock on a flight deck door because I'll explain to you later what it means, but you don't knock on the door. So what you do is you have a sort of pad in front of the door. I'll try and find a picture. And what you do is normal access, you will use the hash key and that will sort of be like a ding dong, someone's at the door, and the flight deck will unlock the door for you to enter. So one of the flight crew members will put the toggle on unlock and the door is unlocked. You can come in and then they will put it back to norm. The norm setup also allows an emergency access. What it means is, say you're a cabin crew, you're a flight attendant, and you're suspecting that there's a incapacitation from either one of the flight crew members or probably both if they're not answering. So say they're not answering the intercom, you're trying to call, nobody's responding, and you try the normal access, you press the hash key and it doesn't open. If you still have no response after normal attempts to contact the flight crew or enter the flight deck, you can dial the emergency code on the pad. So you dial that and you will have a beep like for 30 seconds, and then after 30 seconds the door will automatically unlock itself for 5 seconds and then you can enter the flight deck. If you try to enter the flight deck on normal access mode because you're bringing coffee or something and nobody's responding to you, what you're assuming as a cabin crew, especially if both of them are inside, you're suspecting that they're on the intercom with ATC or another aircraft, or they're dealing with, maybe a mechanical failure and they're busy. They just can't talk to you right now. They can't have, someone else come in the flight deck because they're just super busy. And that's pretty normal. But usually what they'll do is they will pick up the intercom and they'll be like, we need a few minutes. Or they will let you in. Usually what they do is they will let you in and they'll hold their hand up, meaning someone is talking to me. I can't respond. I can't listen to you right now. That's just pretty normal procedure. And so that's why when you do the pin, there's like a window of 30 seconds, the door doesn't unlock, it doesn't open, because it gives time for the flight crew to, first of all, check that you're not doing the emergency pin because someone is threatening you and someone is asking you, to access the flight deck. And so it gives them time to check the camera or maybe, finish their conversation on the intercom or whatever it is that they're doing. And just so you know, well, you probably know, but flight deck doors used to not have any security whatsoever before 9/11, and obviously because of what happened, the rule changed. So now every flight deck door, pretty much every flight deck door, has a panel, and it's the door is super safe. You cannot breach. This means that even if someone is trying to hijack the plane, and for some reason they were able to bring, I don't know, a firearm or a knife or whatever on board, and they're threatening the crew to make them enter the flight deck, first of all, the captain or the first officer will see it on the camera, and if the camera's not working for some reason, because that can happen, there's a peephole on the door, so they will see. They will not let anybody enter the flight deck, and even when they do, if they're expecting one of the crew members to come in to bring, I don't know, coffee, food, or whatever, they will make sure that that person is by themselves in the galley before they enter the flight deck. It's pretty secure. Like you just don't get into a flight deck like that. All right, so let's get back to our timeline. Obviously, Marseille is freaking out. They don't know what's going on. They don't know why the aircraft is descending. They're not supposed to. The captain tries to contact the first officer through the intercom. He doesn't answer. Then the captain tries the emergency pin on the pad, and after 30 seconds, it doesn't unlock because the first officer, he just overrides it. He obviously, the flight crew have the power to override the emergency access from inside. Because, as I said, if someone is trying to hijack the plane and they know that crew members have an emergency access code, they can try to ask you to do the emergency access code. They should have, I mean, it just makes sense that they should have the power to override it from inside the flight deck. And at that point, I was actually, when I was doing my research and I was reading about that, I was wondering how the captain knew that the first officer was doing it on purpose. I was wondering why he didn't think that it was a medical issue, that the first officer maybe passed out, or, you know, he had something wrong with him and he couldn't get to the door, or he couldn't unlock the door. But he just knew because he was overriding the emergency access. So let's say he was passed out and you do the emergency code, you're supposed to be able to get in the flight deck because the toggle is supposed to be set on norm. So the first thing he did was he definitely put it on lock and he locked the door. And every time someone was calling or you know, even knocking on the door, which is not normal procedure, nobody knocks on the door. He was not answering to that either. So he immediately knew that he was doing that on purpose. So at that point, he starts to bang on the door and he's yelling, open the door, because he sees that the aircraft is descending very rapidly and he's not getting any response, he's not getting any answer. He's obviously freaking out and he knows that there's absolutely nothing he can do to get inside the flight deck. In my research, I found that apparently he took the axe. There's an axe on board aircrafts, pretty much all of them, I think. And if you're wondering why there's an axe on board an aircraft, it's simply because if there's an electrical fire, you know, because all the electrics are underneath the seats. You know, sometimes you have electrics for, you know, the screen that's on the seat in front of you, or any other electricals for the aircraft to function, and they will be usually underneath the seat. And if there's a fire that started, you know, like around the electrics, you need to have an axe to be able to reach it. I'm guessing he might have also tried to bang on the door with a fire extinguisher. He probably tried with anything he had access to, anything that would be, you know, strong enough to open a door. But this door is impenetrable. You just can't access the flight deck unless someone opens the door for you. While the captain is doing that, while the captain is trying to get inside and he's freaking out, Marseille is still trying to contact the flight deck, and then the plane starts to send an automatic message when it senses that it's too low, and there's a sort of beep in the flight deck, and there's also a message that says terrain, pull up, pull up. It's telling you that you should pull up, you're just too low and you're not supposed to be that low. After about 10 minutes of all this craziness going on, the plane crashed in the French Alps on a mountain called Les Trois Évêchés. This plane is from Germanwings and it belongs to the airline Lufthansa, so they opened an investigation, but because the crash happened in France, the French authorities also started their own investigation. When police got on the spot, they described it as, you know, they described the parts. I'm having a hard time with this. When police got on the site, they described the scene and the parts of the plane as as dust, because nothing was big enough to be recognized. They did find this part of the plane that was pretty much intact, and it had the sort of the, ID of the plane or VIN number of the plane, because each have, a specific one, obviously, and they found that part that was pretty much intact. But other than that, it was pretty much dust. They found the black box and it was sent to Paris for analysis. At first, everybody's thinking that it has to have been a mechanical failure. And because this happened after the terrorist attacks that we had in Paris happened a few months earlier, the second theory was that it could have been a terrorist attack as well. At that point, nobody is even considering a murder suicide. They calculated the speed of the aircraft, and apparently it took a quarter of a second for the plane to crash, for the back of the aircraft to collide with the front of the aircraft. So I mean, can you imagine a quarter of a second? I mean, at least I do find a little bit of comfort in the idea that it happened in a split second, but they saw it happen, they saw it coming. When they were going through the wreckage, the goal was to collect everything and collect all the parts of the plane, but also the body parts. The goal was to, you know, get the bodies back to the families and also the personal items. And I saw an interview of one of the police officers that was in charge of the collecting the wreckage, and he was very emotional. It actually made me cry. He said that he found kids' toys, and apparently the youngest passenger on board was not even 2 years old. This was really hard for me to cover, but yeah, I'll explain why later. So the black box is analyzed in Paris, and they don't say anything to the families. They actually know what happened, but they don't say anything to the families. I think it was about a day later, or maybe 2 days after the crash, the info was leaked to the New York Times, and it was the New York Times who published an article explaining that it was a murder suicide. I mean, I don't think they said murder suicide, but they said that the co-pilot, had done it on purpose. And the entire world found out through leaked information to the New York Times. Now, you have to understand that this is something pretty serious, and the Bureau of Investigation of Accidents in the aviation industry in France, I mean, it had to have been someone pretty high up that leaked the information. I don't know why that is, and I couldn't find any more information about that, but I mean, it's pretty serious, and it was pretty embarrassing for France. Obviously, the families of the victims were allowed to hear the audio of the black box, and they heard their family members screaming and yelling and understanding what was going on when they saw the captain, banging on the door and trying to go back inside the flight deck, and they were seeing the aircraft descending. I mean, I don't know if anybody knew that the first officer was doing it on purpose. I know that they realized that something was wrong, and they realized that the captain was trying to get back in and the aircraft was descending. I'm thinking some of them must have thought that it was a mechanical failure, or maybe the first officer passed out, or he had a heart attack, or whatever. I mean, in that moment, I think you have, all the scenarios, going through your head, and you're just seeing yourself die. Maybe they didn't even think about it. Maybe they didn't even think about the pilot, and maybe they were just, I don't know, like thinking about their families. And uh, this is really hard to do. This is really hard for me. This is really hard for me. This made me cry more than any other case that I've covered on my channel. The investigation, this is pretty gut wrenching, but the investigation also revealed that apparently Lubitz had a sort of rehearsal on the previous flight. What happened was they started that day, the same crew started that day, leaving from Dusseldorf to Barcelona, and then from Barcelona they were going back to Germany. And apparently on the first flight out, he did the same thing with the commands. He waited for the captain to leave the aircraft, I don't know, to get his meal or whatever. Like, they're allowed to be out of the flight deck. It never has caused any issues in the past. So he was out of the flight deck, I don't know why, and Lubitz changed the altitude of the plane again, and he changed it to 100 feet, exactly how it happened before the tragedy. He did that 4 times on 4 different occasions, and that was recorded. That was, I mean, everything that happens in a plane is recorded, so they were able to find out that he did that, and he did that 4 times. And also air traffic control, they know it too. Like when they see that happening, they know it too, even if it's, for just a few seconds, but they know it. Each time, each of the 4 times that he did that on the previous flight, he was able to just, put it back to normal. And a lot of people have speculated that he just maybe chickened out. He wanted to do it, but then he didn't do it. Or maybe he was just rehearsing, like checking if it was really going to happen. You don't really need to rehearse because you're a pilot yourself. I mean, first officer pilot is exactly the same thing. The only thing that changes is the amount of flying hours. So it's pretty much the same thing. Like you're able to fly the plane. You know how things work. He didn't need to rehearse in order to know that if he did that, the plane was gonna go down. He just knew. I don't think he was rehearsing. I think he wanted to do it on the first flight, but I think he just changed his mind. And the fact that he did that on the previous flight, a lot of people think that it was premeditated. He was gonna do it eventually. He had thought about it. He had actually researched it. It was just a matter of time. He was gonna do it eventually, but it was a matter of time. It was not a last minute decision. As you can imagine, the investigation led to Andreas Lubitz and his family, his past. They pretty much tried to recover any information that they could on this guy. A lot of people described him as shy and funny and kind and smart, a pretty normal person, and nobody seemed to have been aware of his mental health issues except his girlfriend. His passion was the aviation, and that's why he became a pilot. He had been hired by Lufthansa in 2009, but after only 2 months, he had to go back to Germany to be hospitalized because of his heavy mental issues. He had been diagnosed with psychotic depression, and he had suicidal tendencies. He was actually able to resume his training and finish it like nothing had happened. The airline actually didn't know about that because of the, doctor patient confidentiality. His doctors were not able to divulge any information to the airline. The one thing I wondered about was the doctors within the airline, because they have to clear you for flying, and if they find you unfit to fly, you can't fly. I was wondering, why some doctors that he was seeing, like his personal doctors, why they did not clear him for flying. But I mean, they can't really do that. They can just tell him, I don't think you should fly. Just like if you have a cold and you go to your doctor and he says, I don't think you should go to work, and he gives you a sick note. Like these are, different doctors, like, normal doctors. But the doctors from within the airline, they actually have the power to say to the airline that you're fit to fly or you're not fit to fly, even if they can't say why, but they have this power of saying that you are not fit to fly because of, physical condition. And it usually is because of physical conditions. Like say you have a cold, for example, or it can be anything else. It's a physician who's doing the consult. It's not a shrink, it's not a psychiatrist, so they can't determine if you're having mental issues. And they do ask you like basic questions if you're depressed or if you take anything. I think he was just able to hide that from the doctors within the company, and they were never made aware of any of his mental issues. When the German police searched Lubitz's house, they found tons and tons of medication for depression and insomnia and stuff like that. And they also found, to me that was actually the worst part, they found torn sick notes for, they actually covered the time of the plane crash. He was not supposed to be flying. One of his doctors, actually two doctors, gave him a sick note, and he was not supposed to have been working during that week. They also found an email in which he was corresponding with one of his doctors, and he was telling him that he was afraid that he was going to lose his eyesight. And the reason for that is because he had a car crash. I think it was like about a week before the plane crash. He blamed his eyesight, and he said it was getting weak and it was getting worse and worse, and he feared that he was not going to be able to be a pilot anymore, and he was very, very paranoid about his eyesight. The investigation revealed also that he had been seeing many, many, many doctors in the previous months leading to the crash. And the mother of Lubitz actually contacted one of his shrinks and she said, "You need to help my son. He really needs help." She could tell that he was not doing well. He was getting worse and worse, in fact, and she knew it, so she contacted one of his psychiatrists and she begged him for help. She said later that the reason she did not contact the airline is because she didn't want him to lose his job. She could not have known that he was going to do that. Maybe she knew that he was paranoid and that he was suicidal. I really don't think she expected him to do something like that. Otherwise, she would probably have called the airline. So in Germany, obviously, and I'm guessing it's pretty much the same everywhere, there is, doctor-patient confidentiality, and the only situation where a doctor can reveal to anybody else something, it's if you're threatening to kill someone. He never did such a thing. He talked about committing suicide, but he never spoke about killing anybody else. And even though he saw many, many doctors, none of them were in the situation where they could say something to anyone. So the airline never knew about it. The airline doctors never knew about it either. So the only people who were aware of his mental health issues were his girlfriend and his mother, maybe his father as well. But that's pretty much it. A couple years before the crash, Lubitz was getting closer to his father. That got him to be doing a little bit better. They were running marathons together and he was doing so much better that he found a girlfriend. She was actually a cabin crew for Germanwings. It's probably how they met, and they even got engaged. But about a year later they broke up, and I guess he just went back to a very dark place. It was also mentioned that he was having money problems. So, when you want to become a pilot, you have two options. Either the airline can pay for it and then you pay it back on your salary, every month, or you're rich, you have the money, and you can just pay for yourself. And obviously, Lubitz was in the first scenario. So the airline paid the training for him, but he had to pay it back, and that's quite a lot of money. The investigation revealed that he had been researching how to commit suicide with medication, but then I think it was a few weeks before the crash, he was researching flight deck doors, and I thought it was pretty surprising because when you're working for an airline, you have access to all the material you need to have all the information you need about the aircraft, and it doesn't seem suspicious because you're supposed to know about this stuff. And I was wondering myself, why did he need to know so much information about the flight deck door? Because he's a pilot, obviously he knows already, but I don't know, apparently that's what he did. People also speculated that maybe he put diuretics in the captain's drinks, which made him want to go to the bathroom so much. That actually made a lot of sense because even in the previous flight, the captain was outside of the flight deck in that moment. And that happened again in the second flight. So, because you remember that during the first flight, he was playing around with the altitude commands in the flight deck while the captain was away from the flight deck. He was outside, and I was wondering, he was outside in the first flight and he was outside again for the second flight. And you have to understand that when you're doing short haul flights, you're doing the flights back to back. So they leave from Düsseldorf, they get to Barcelona, they only have the time, to disembark and re-embark new passengers, and then they leave. You don't have a lot of time in between flights, and usually the flight crew, they have, like a lot of checks to make, and they have a lot of things to do, in between flights, and they're pretty busy. The best time for them to, take a break or eat something is when they're on cruise and when the plane is on autopilot. So it really is a possibility that he spiked his drink, so he would want to go to the bathroom so much, which is another element that supports premeditation. I really want to know what you think about the airline. Do you think they're responsible? Do you think they should have known? Personally, I don't think they could have known. I think they did everything they had to do as an airline. They have doctors, they do regular checks, sometimes even random checks. If the employee is lying about what sort of medication they take, the employee is lying. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. I personally don't think, from everything I read, I personally don't think that the airline was responsible for what happened. Their responsibility, however, lies with what happens afterward, like what they do afterwards, for the families of the victims, and if they implemented new rules, because that is your responsibility. You have to do something about that. You have to take a lesson from this tragedy. I can understand that when you're in so much pain, you're trying to find someone to blame, and some of the families of the victims, they really blamed the airline, like 100%, it's your fault. You should have known that he was not doing well. You should have known that he was not fit to fly. As a former cabin crew myself, I can tell that the airline, I mean, at least the ones I've worked for, they do make sure that you're fit to fly on a, physiological level, but on a mental level, it's really hard to assess. I think it's really hard to assess. I don't even know what they have in place for pilots, because cabin crew are different. We don't have the same responsibilities. But when you're a pilot, I mean, I don't really know what they do to assess their mental health, and I don't really know what they could have done to prevent this. I mean, I'm guessing they have psych evals for pilots because they have so much responsibility on their shoulders. But again, I think it could be pretty easy to cheat. I don't know. That's my opinion. Some people have also been blaming not the doctors themselves, but the system, the fact that they cannot divulge any information, even if it's that critical. But again, the doctors themselves could not have known that he was going to do that. I don't think anybody could have foreseen that he was going to do something like that. And in cases of mass murder, I think it's always the same scenario. Nobody could predict that the tragedy was going to happen. I don't think. I mean, I don't know. I was just asking myself a lot of questions. Can you prevent murder? Can you prevent mass murder? That's the question. That's the big question. His former girlfriend, the one he had been engaged to, they had been together for about 5 months, and she reported that he was having insomnia. He wasn't really able to sleep at night. She knew that he was taking a lot of medication, that he was not doing well. She also reported that one day he told her that he was going to do something so great that people were going to remember his name and it was going to change things. Obviously, she didn't know what it meant. She said that one of the reasons he was doing so poorly is because his dream was to become a captain on long haul flights. As a flight attendant or as a pilot, first officer or whatever, I think everybody dreams of doing long haul flights. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's pretty nice to be doing, I don't know, Paris, Berlin or Paris, London. But if you're doing Paris, Tokyo or Paris, New York, it's more glamorous. It's just much nicer, and it's a better lifestyle too. At least that's how I feel about it. For some reason, he knew that he was never going to be able to access that. Now, is it because he knew that he wanted to commit suicide, or is it because he knew that he was just, calling in sick so often that it was never going to happen for him? It could also have been because he was convinced that he was losing his eyesight, but apparently the medication that he was taking, some of them had the side effect of having suicidal thoughts and paranoia. This is so ironic. Like, what is the point of taking medication for depression if it actually is making things so much worse? I mean, the definition of a psychotic depression is that you're having delusions, sometimes even hallucinations, and paranoia. So that's why he thought he was going blind. The medication apparently somehow made it worse. After this incident happened, the airline paid damages to the families of the victim, the initial amount of 50,000 euros, and then they added them an extra 45,000, so that was 95,000 euros, which is about 100,000 US dollars. And a lot of airlines have implemented this new rule to prevent such a thing from happening again, that every time someone leaves the flight deck, there should be someone to step in to sort of replace them. Not as a pilot, but just so there's always two people inside the flight deck. So say the captain goes for a bathroom break, one of the cabin crew members has to step in to be inside the flight deck, and that's a way for them to make sure that if somehow the co-pilot or the pilot wants to crash the plane, someone is inside and someone is going to be able to open that door. And I was actually very surprised, but in the history of aviation, this happened in the past, and it happened a total of 6 other times. Before this one, I actually never knew that it happened in the past, and the most fatal one, this is not confirmed, but the most fatal one is apparently the Malaysian airline flight. I think it was number 370, the one that crashed, and nobody found it for months and months. And apparently, it is suspected that it could have been a murder-suicide as well. It's not confirmed. This one is confirmed, but the Malaysian Airlines one is not confirmed. You should know that whenever there's an incident, an accident, or such a big tragedy in the aviation industry, it never is because of one factor. It always is a combination, a set of factors, of events that will lead to the crash of a plane. But in this case, I think it's very particular. I think in this case, you can safely say that it was only one thing, and it was the co-pilot being suicidal. You could also argue that the second thing is the flight deck door, and maybe something could be done about that. Could there be a solution to that? And if you're thinking that you could have a pin that could be given only to the flight crew for them to enter the flight deck, like no matter what, and nobody could override it from within the flight deck. The issue here would be that if one of the pilots is ever outside the cabin and somebody knows about that, like somebody knows about this rule, you could try to threaten the pilot that's outside, and if you know they have a pin that is specifically made for them that would allow them access to the flight deck no matter what, that could be an issue as well. So that is not a possibility. I don't think it is possible to do something about the flight deck door. And the third element that people have argued is the fact that, doctor patient confidentiality should be lifted in a case like this. But how do you know when to lift it? Like, where's the limit? What's the threshold that would allow a doctor to say, okay, this is to me, this is warning signs for me to say something to the airline? A lot of pilots have disagreed about this, saying that it was just this one incident, and maybe in the history of aviation it did happen a few times, but it's not like it's a recurring event. There was a memorial that was made in honor of the victims. It looks like this. It's these, sort of metallic sticks, I guess. You can call them sticks. And there's 149 because obviously the first officer is not considered a victim. He's the one who killed all these innocent people. In the nearest town cemetery, they actually buried all the body parts that they could not identify. If you know me, if you personally know me, you know that I used to be a cabin crew not too long ago, or flight attendant, whatever you want to call it. And that's the reason I wanted to talk about this case. I felt like I could give some information as an insider as to the flight deck door. I think a lot of people, from the comments that I read on YouTube and everything, a lot of people didn't know how the flight deck door worked, and like they didn't have precise information as to why the captain was not able to re-enter the flight deck. So I just wanted to give that information, and also because this was actually a very hard case for me to talk about, because I saw myself in a similar situation. You're trained to see yourself in similar situations, and what you would do and how you would react. In my last video, in the last case that I covered, I identified myself a lot with the victim, but here I feel like it's a bit more intense because it used to be my job, it used to be my life. I was actually very passionate about flying, about planes, and about my job, and I just loved it so much. And imagining myself in that situation, and seeing yourself die wearing the uniform and hearing the passengers screaming and yelling, and there's nothing you can do, it was pretty hard for me. When I heard the recording of the black box, that's when I actually cried, because it was not just passengers, it was also crew members. It could have been me. You think it could have been me. Not only that, but I know a lot of people don't know that, but when you're cabin crew, 80% of your training is safety and security, and it's only about 20% on customer service and how to serve people and stuff. Like it's not that it doesn't matter, it does matter, but you're supposed to know how to deal with an emergency, how to deal with a disruptive passenger, a sick passenger, a hijacker even. You're supposed to be able to handle all these situations. My favorite part of the training was first aid, because you're taught how to do CPR, how to sort of diagnose someone. You don't really diagnose, you're not a doctor, but you're trying to figure out what's wrong with someone, and inform the captain and figure out your next course of action. And it's pretty interesting. Everything was pretty interesting, but I don't know, to me first aid was the best part of the training. Everything else, I think people are not aware of everything else that we can handle. If we crash and survive, we're taught to handle the situation. We're taught to, send distress signals and to survive in the wilderness and to help passengers and like do all of that. It's pretty intense, and it really is most of your training. And just imagining myself in a situation you have no control over, I think as a crew member, either flight crew or cabin crew, I think it's your worst fear. And at first, when I heard about this tragedy, of course, I was extremely sad, but I was so angry because when you're part of a crew, your goal is to make sure that everybody gets from point A to point B safely, securely, and having had a pleasant experience on board with us. We work as a team, and as a team, we're supposed to do all of that. And thinking that one team member was like so far off the common goal is just infuriating. No, it just made me so angry. And this concludes the tragic story of Flight 9525. I'm sorry, I really feel like I don't have a lot of, I don't want to say energy because it's not the right word for what I'm doing, but I probably sound very depressed and very like I'm about to cry. I did a lot of crying already, so I'm not going to do that now. But okay, next part of the video is just going to take me a couple minutes, but I thought I would share with you insider tips on how to improve your flying experience. The first thing is seatbelt. You should fasten your seatbelt at all times. If you're not going to the bathroom, if you're at your seat, I really suggest, I really recommend, and they say that anyway whenever you take a flight anywhere, they will tell you to fasten your seatbelt at all times. The plane will not crash from turbulence, but you can severely injure yourself from the turbulence. So it is a recommendation to fasten your seatbelt at all times. If you're the kind of person who always gets cold, the back of the aircraft is usually warmer, so this is a better place for you to sit. Although, if it's really, really cold, you can always ask crew members to rise the temperature because they can do that. When a cabin crew tells you to do something, it's usually for your safety, for your security, or for your well being. So listen to them, please. When they tell you that you cannot have your laptop on your laps or your handbag or any bag that you're carrying with you, if you can't have it on your laps or between your feet, it's for your safety. If there's turbulence when you're landing, and you should know that out of the 3 stages of flight, so takeoff, cruise, and landing, takeoff and landing are the most critical ones. If anything has to happen, if any catastrophe has to happen during a flight, it will most likely be during takeoff and landing. So takeoff and landing, make sure you don't have anything on your laps or between your feet, because if you want to get out of the plane, you don't want anything to to prevent you from doing that. And the laptop, if the landing is bumpy, the laptop can get in your face or in someone else's face, and it can hurt you pretty bad. You can listen to music during takeoff and landing, but I personally don't ever do that, because if there's an announcement, you're gonna be in the dark and you're gonna see people start to freak out. You're gonna freak out even more because you're gonna be like, what the hell is happening? And if the person sitting next to you doesn't speak the same language, it's gonna take even more time for you to figure out what's going on. So my recommendation, no music for takeoff and landing. This is actually my favorite tip. I always carry baby wipes when I travel, not just for the trip itself when I get to my destination, but also for the plane. I always clean my armrests, my screen, my table. I just clean everything that I know I'm going to be touching around my seat, and in the bathroom as well. The cleanest crew that I've ever seen in my entire career as a cabin crew was in Japan. The crew got in the plane, and obviously I was going to disembark and I was going to stay there for a few days. But before you leave the plane, you have like a few last checks to make. And I saw the cleaning crew come in and they started cleaning, and oh my god, I have never seen a cleaning crew be that meticulous. So if you're flying out of Japan, chances are the plane is going to be as clean as can be. If you're not flying out of Japan, take baby wipes with you. Now I have this reflex of, spotting where the emergency exit is, not only in aircraft, but also in other places. Because I remember my first training, we had this video that they showed us. It really traumatized me, but it was this video about, they were teaching us about fire, and it was this video of a nightclub, and it was a tragedy that happened in the USA. Inside the nightclub, there was like this pyro you know, like fireworks thing, whatever, and one of the drapes caught fire and everybody started panicking, and everybody was trying to rush out the door they came in from. And in the video, they were, you know, highlighting the emergency exit that was like right there, and it could have prevented so many deaths, but people were just not aware that they could have exited from other places. So now every time I go somewhere, I just try to make sure, okay, where's the nearest exit to me, and you know, how can I escape if something happens? Actually, this one might be my favorite. If you're not nice to cabin crew members, they have handcuffs, so be nice. They can literally tie you to your seat and put handcuffs on you until you reach your destination, and police is going to be waiting for you. They don't always have to handcuff you and tie you to your seat. That's only if you're being like super, super disruptive. But if you're being rude and if you're, you know, harassing one of the crew members, police can be waiting for you. You're thinking you're in the sky and nothing's going to happen to you and there's not going to be any consequences, but the consequence is going to be when you land in the form of police custody. So be nice. Did you know that when you're in altitude, your taste buds lose sensitivity to about 30%? You don't really feel it because you're up there, but usually the food in the plane, the food that they serve you in the plane, has more salt and more sugar in it for that reason. So a lot of people, they actually do intermittent fasting when they're flying. Although you shouldn't really drink the water that they serve you in the plane unless it comes in a bottle. Cabin crew actually don't know how often they clean the tanks. That's why we never actually drink it. Don't drink aircraft water. You should drink though, because the air is very dry, so you really have to hydrate yourself. Just try to avoid plain water. And last but not least, try and be friends with the cabin crew, especially if they're from Europe, because they get really cool perks. One of them being staff travel, or as they call it in the US, a buddy pass. I think they call it a buddy pass. Basically, you travel for super, super cheap. And I know it's not the case in the US. I think we have it best in Europe. I also want to say that in Europe, the job of a flight attendant or cabin crew is much more glamorous because the airlines, they pay us more and we have more perks, and also we tend to stay in hotels that are, sometimes they have like even 2 stars, 3 stars, and they're located in the center, like in the city center of wherever you go. So like I went to Tokyo and I was in downtown Tokyo. When I went to New York, the hotel in New York for Air France crew is in Times Square actually, and San Diego is the same, and like pretty much every city you go to when you have a layover, the hotel is going to be downtown, and this is how most European airlines, that's how they work. So when you're a flight attendant and you're traveling like on your free time, you don't pay that much money. You actually only pay airport taxes. So for example, I flew Paris Seattle on my staff travel, and I only paid 100 euros. And also, most likely, your colleagues will upgrade you and the people who are traveling with you in business class if they can, and if the captain says yes. So usually they say yes. You just have to be nice to them and bring them chocolates. It's time for the random item review, and I actually found out that my audience is mostly female, 70%. Most people who watch true crime, whether be it on YouTube or Netflix or whatever, is actually female. And I'll talk about that in one of my future videos, maybe my next video. So the random item for tonight is panty liners. This is a set of 5. I don't know why they didn't make it a set of 7, you know, 1 for every day, but I guess it's okay. They apparently dry really fast, and they have this like button thingy, and you have like 2 different sizes. So this would be the side that you would put up, obviously, and so you would put it on your like inside your underwear, and you would just sort of clip it, and you have 2 different sizes. Pretty cool. As usual, thank you so much for watching till the end. Thanks a lot to all the people who recently subscribed to my channel. It makes me really, really happy, and it just gives me even more motivation to keep going. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Leave me a comment. Feel free to make any suggestions for next week's case. And as usual, I'll see you soon. Bye.